Alright, I'm back again, and I did a video not too long ago that kind of explained some of the cameras I'd owned in the past and that I'd gotten rid of, and kind of a brief explanation as to why I'd gotten rid of them. And I also said at the end, you know, it's not a great idea to accumulate gear and to just keep collecting things and letting them pile up and never use it. And, you know, a lot of people liked that video. It was fairly popular, and a lot of people disagreed with it. So to appease those who disagreed, I'm going to do a camera wish list video of some overpriced camera gear and some obscure lenses that I want, and hopefully not too many other people want, so I can actually find one and get it at a reasonable price. So if you're familiar with my channel, you're probably going to be able to guess the first thing on my list, and that is a Nikon S2, the only main powerhouse Nikon rangefinder camera I don't have. I just haven't picked one of these up. I never really intended to get some of the ones I have. I just found really good deals and kind of bought them. But I would like to get one and try it out. I think it would be a good, solid camera to have, and it would kind of complete the collection. I don't think I really want too many more Nikon lenses. I have a lot of the lenses covered, and a few of the ones that are left are ones I wouldn't really use, like a 135mm lens, or ones like the super fast aperture variations, which I think are a little overrated and very overpriced, and some extremely rare variations on fairly common lenses, like the 105mm f4, which is a smaller, lighter weight, sort of a mountain Elmar for Nikons. Apparently it was designed to go with the S4, but because of that, it's extremely rare. You see them pop up every once in a while, and they're not horribly expensive, but as you might know, I already have a 105mm f2.5, so I don't really see the point in kind of downgrading and going to one with a much lower aperture just because it's a little smaller and lighter. There is one Nikon lens I'd like to have, and that would be the 25mm f4 with the viewfinder preferably. Unfortunately, these are pretty rare and expensive, so I might pick one up someday, but again, they are pretty hard to find. They seem to be very sought after by collectors, so I'm not sure that's something I'll be able to really get my hands on anytime in the near future. And to kind of round off the Nikon-ish stuff, you know I like my third-party lenses. I love that Kimura 35mm f2.8, and there's some other companies that make similar lenses, and of course, Kimura makes other lenses. In fact, Kimura makes an 80mm f1.8 lens I've mentioned before, and I would love to have it. I've seen some results, and it looks like a really good image. It looks like it produces really good images, but it's very rare and very expensive, and I'm just not in a big hurry to smack down $1,000 for yet another 80mm lens, especially when I have two 85mm lenses right now. I feel like that's total overkill. Another thing I would kind of be considering is another kind of wide-angle lens. They don't make a lot of 28s for the generic 28s, that is, for the Nikon S mount. There's a Voigtlander one out there, but it's quite rare. I wouldn't mind having it, but the Voigtlander 35 f2.5 didn't really blow me away, and I kind of suspect the 28 f3.5 would be in that same neighborhood. There's a few Japanese brands out there that made 35mm lenses, usually f2.8s or f3.5s. Silgor made one, and I think a couple other companies, I can't think of who. I want to say maybe Tanara made one. But unfortunately, they're kind of hard to find. They're not always horribly expensive, but they are pretty hard to find, and I just can't say I'm in a big hurry to have more 35mm lenses since I already have about 5 of them. There is something pretty interesting, though, I found. There's a company called Old Delft from the Netherlands, I guess Delft being kind of like the pottery company, and they made a few lenses in Contax mount. Most of them were wider angle lenses, and they had a 35mm f3.5 that should be compatible with the Nikon rangefinders, but unfortunately these lenses cost about $2,000, so I don't think I'll be able to get my hands on one anytime soon, but they look pretty interesting, and they're pretty obscure, which is right up my alley. Speaking of obscure lenses, one I've wanted for a while would be the Avenon 28mm f3.5. These were also sometimes sold as Cobalux lenses and under a couple of other names, but usually the ones you find are Avenons, and I think these are pretty interesting. I've seen some image results, and they look pretty solid. The problem being this is on the old Leica screw mount, and I don't really have a camera right now that uses that mounting. So to shore up that problem, I'd kind of like to get one of those cameras, and the one I've had my eye on is the Yasuhara T918, and this is a pretty obscure camera that was kind of built with a lot of similarities to the Voigtlander Bessas, and I think the Carl Zeiss Icon ZM series cameras, both of which were built with a Cosina camera company in Japan, who also built the Nikon FM10. But it's a pretty interesting camera. It's a little ugly looking, but it does have a parallax corrected viewfinder and a built-in light meter, which is pretty cool. It seems like they're actually fairly reliable, even though they are kind of ugly, and some people say the build quality is not amazing, but I like the look of them. They're actually not horribly expensive, but again, I don't think they have the best reputation due to their looks and their kind of mediocre build quality, but it's definitely something I'd like to try out, and I think it'd be really fun to mount one of those Avenon lenses on it, maybe with that giant Avenon viewfinder they made. I think that'd be a pretty fun thing to shoot with, but unfortunately they're pretty rare. They're not horribly expensive, like I said, but I'm often kind of suspicious that they might not be in the best working condition. I haven't bought one yet, but I have considered that, and it's something on my wish list. So another camera in that same family would probably be a Canon P, and that's probably their premier rangefinder, with maybe the exception of the Canon 7s. I'd much rather have a P just because I don't like the way the 7s have that selenium light meter on them, and they're so old, they're never really going to work anymore. So I'd rather have something like a Canon P that just has, that's just a mechanical camera that works, and you can mount a light meter on top, kind of like you do with the S3 or the SP. It does use the screw mount lenses. It uses some, Nikon made some lenses for Canon. Canon made a lot of their own lenses. You can mount the old Leica lenses. You can mount that Avanon, as well as dozens of other lenses from obscure manufacturers. And I believe the Canon P has 35, 50, and 100 millimeter frame lines etched into the viewfinder, very reminiscent of the Nikon S3. I'm not sure it has the parallax correction marks, but I know it's very similar overall. Another camera kind of parting with the rangefinders and going with SLRs would be an Alpa. It's hard to say exactly what subcategory, since there's several primary models and each model has submodels, but I'd love to have one of these Alpa reflex cameras, especially one of the kind of earlier mid-series ones. There's tons of lenses for these. Alpa didn't really make many lenses, but I know, I can't think of the companies. There was a company out of Paris that made lenses, and Meyer Optics made some lenses for them, and I think even Carl Zeiss might have made a handful of lenses for them. But there's quite a few different lenses out there from a lot of different manufacturers, and I know they vary in quality greatly. I'd love to have some of that stuff, but it's all extremely expensive. And another thing I've noticed is a lot of the cameras just, they don't seem to have held up too well over time. You see a lot of cameras that seem to have damaged shutters or seem to have like external corrosion, which is kind of unusual. I'm not exactly sure what they're made out of. I believe it was some sort of aircraft grade aluminum, but I'm not quite certain on that. So that's definitely a camera family I'd like to add to my list, and maybe someday I'll get at least one, maybe two camera bodies and a couple lenses. But again, due to the cost, I don't really see that happening anytime too soon. Another camera is I think it's the Tower 2B. No, I think it's Ashita 2B or the Tower 24, maybe 25. I can't remember. There's a lot of these cameras. They're all kind of the same. At least they look the same. They were made by Ashita, which is the company that later became Pentax, but they were sold in the US under the Tower branding, which was exclusively sold at Sears. I don't really care which one, if it's got the Ashita or the Tower branding. If it's the Ashita, it would be the 2B model, and if it's the Tower, it would be the 24, like you see right there. These are pretty interesting. These are technically the first, I think they're the first reflex cameras made in Japan. They're not the first ones made anywhere, but they're the first ones made in Japan to my knowledge, and some people argue that the first instant return reflex cameras, and I don't think that's entirely true. I believe there's a really obscure company somewhere in Eastern Europe that beat them to the punch by a few months or a year, but they didn't last very long. So this is actually the first commercially successful, widely available instant return reflex camera mirror thing. I'm getting all the terms confused. It's kind of odd to talk about that because we're so used to that stuff being automatic nowadays. It's hard to believe there were cameras that didn't have an automatic return or automatic mirror. But they only made a handful of lenses for these. They had a sort of a screw mount type apparatus on the front, but it wasn't the standard 39 millimeter one that the Leicas used, and it wasn't the 42 millimeter interchangeable ones that were used later on by a lot of kind of lower rung manufacturers. I don't know the exact sizing of it, but it doesn't fit many lenses. There were only a couple lens options sold with these cameras. There was a 50 f3.5, and then there was a 58 that I believe was an f2.4. I think I'd rather have the 58 f2.4, but either one would work. These are pretty interesting. They have sort of a waist level viewfinder. There's a little magnifying glass that pops up, and they also have a little secondary viewfinder off to the side, a feature they have in common with the Alpas, which not too many other cameras have. I don't know exactly how useful that would be, but it looks really interesting, and I'd like to just kind of try them out and play with them. These cameras aren't horribly expensive, nor are they especially rare, but they're just pricey enough. I'm not in a big hurry to get one, and I'm also not sure about the mechanical reliability. You don't find a ton of information on the usability of these cameras. I know they're a little bit more complicated to shoot, but you don't see too many shooting tutorials, and you don't hear many people talking about repairing them or their reliability, but I would, if I find one in good condition, be willing to purchase one of those and try it out. I've seen some tests from some of the lenses, and they were not amazing, but they weren't bad. Again, it's kind of a primitive camera with a lot of the earlier models. I think you have to open up the aperture as wide as it'll go to focus, and then when you're actually going to take the photo, you have to close down the aperture to the aperture you want to use very manually, which is kind of tedious and something that pushed me away from these cameras. But regardless, it is something I would like to try at some point down the road, because they're They're very unusual and neat looking cameras, and they're also historically kind of a landmark camera in some ways. So that's pretty much it for the 35mm cameras. As you know, I don't really particularly have a great love of medium format. I think it's kind of a little bit too expensive to shoot nowadays. I mean, and I sometimes feel people vastly overestimate the quality you get out of medium format as compared to 35mm, and some people for some reason have them that medium format's better than a digital camera, which is objectively not true, and I don't really know where they even get this from, but I would like to try at least one medium format camera, and that would probably be Palabol's, I don't know how you say it, Palabol's Mikana 6.7, and this was an interesting camera. It was kind of, I think they were made in Germany, but they have Nikon lenses, and Nikon never made medium format cameras, but they did make some medium format lenses for these cameras, and also for the, what are they called, Bessas, one of the more obscure Japanese brands that made sort of lower tier medium format cameras. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, I should know it, but they did make some medium format lenses, and this is the only camera that had, I think, a built-in Nikon medium format lens. They shoot 6x7, so you get that same horrible film economy of the Mamiya 7, but I've heard a lot of people say they actually prefer these to the Mamiya 7, especially when you consider the fact that the Mamiya 7 only has an 80mm f4 lens, and the Palabol Mikanas have an 80mm f2.8 lens, so they're way faster. While the Mamiyas do provide just good, sharp, solid images and a nice bokeh quality, supposedly the Mikanas provide a much more unique look. I don't really know how to sum it up. I've seen some of the images. A lot of the times the colors seem a little over-exaggerated, and the bokeh is a lot more dramatic and kind of overblown and everything. It's probably not a style for everybody. I would kind of like to pick one of these up. I've been warned you have to be careful because they do have sort of bellows that are made out of a cardboard type stuff, and they can get damaged. I think they're pretty easy to fix, but that is sometimes an issue. Another big problem a lot of them seem to have is that the light meters just kind of die, and it seems like a decent number of them have dead light meters. So when you find affordable ones on eBay, and by affordable I mean somewhat cheaper than the average model, they're still usually somewhere around $2,000. Those almost always have a broken light meter. The ones that have a functional meter usually sell for a couple $100s more, but still technically they're relatively cheap compared to a lot of things like the Mamiya 7s, and arguably compared to a lot of 35mm Leicas nowadays. But that is one I would definitely be interested in trying out. Who knows, maybe someday I might even trade my Mamiya 7 for one if I ever find somebody who has one of these. There are a couple of versions of the camera. The two main differences is there's one with the 80mm f2.8 lens, and there's one that has a 55mm f4.5 lens. And they're both kind of tempting, but I see and hear a lot more about the one with the 80mm lens, and I think I would just kind of prefer that one because it is a lot more common, and I think it's also quite a bit cheaper. So if I got one, I would go with that. And boy, I think that's pretty much it for now for my camera wish list. There's a few other things I could put on here, but I was trying to keep it kind of reasonable to things that I like, that are things I either can't afford and am kind of saving up for and have looked for, or things that are pretty obscure that I don't think a lot of people know about. Like the Avanon lenses are one. I don't think many people know about those, and even the Tower like 24s and the Ashita 2Bs. They don't seem to be very well known. I guess they've just kind of been forgotten by time. But they do all look pretty interesting, and not to mention all those obscure S-mount non-Nikon lenses. Those are very rare and obscure. I kind of wish there were a few more of them out there, but I'm definitely going to try to hunt a couple of them down and try them at some point in the future, as soon as I can find ones that are affordable. So that's pretty much it for this list. Hopefully I didn't waste too much time. So yeah, you can maybe leave some notes down in the comments of how I'm stupid for wanting this or that, or how you want this or that, or whatever. But hope you enjoy this. I kind of liked it for some reason. Somewhat therapeutic to just talk about cameras I want and not have to actually try to go out and spend thousands of dollars and buy them and risk having them destroyed as they're shipped from Japan.